Now, this is often called whale rock, but it's probably a shark. If we look at, we've got the tail coming up here, got a fin there. A fin there goes all the way up here. Can you see in the old days where it was painted? You can see scraps of paint. And it comes up all the way here to a peak. You can see it's not a round head like a whale. So it comes to a point, which I would assume is some kind of a shark or... And as we come down here, you can see the engraving. You've got a fin there and another fin there. Now, this is usually the worst time to see an engraving. It should be first thing in the morning or last thing in the day, because then you start to see the angle on the engraving. When you've got the sun overhead, it's much harder to see. What we have in the middle here is a figure, and you can see, you might be able to see this square head. You've got a leg coming there, and possibly a leg there, a penis and a tail. But we don't know what this is. What I want you to think about is the survival of this site. You have one of the highest industrial areas here. There were boats, there were trains, there were trucks. This was a road where you're sitting. We worked with North Sydney Council, we worked with Metro Land Council, we worked with people from the Redfern community to actually save this site. Everyone would come running down this track, over the rock and down the road to the rest of Ball's Head. So the first thing we did is we got rid of the road, dug up the road, and this is what we do at our office. We try and find a way to protect this site. So what we've done is we've worked with council to put this walking platform that keeps everyone off the rock. But having said that, I was on that platform with a group one day. Someone came, ran straight across the rock because I was on the platform. So we then had to put in these fences. Woo! And we've got, I think we've got a fence there, but what they did was they planted this Kunzia ambigua, which is a bit of wattle in here. And what they're doing is they're actually protecting this whole site. It also, all this bushland also captures water, so the water doesn't sit around the rock. But when you look at the line diagram, you can see there was once much more here. Possibly under that road and possibly in that direction, or maybe up this way. Whoa! So, are there any, I don't know if this engraving was made by the Cammeraygal people, and this is, of course, the country of the Cammeraygal people. Now, the Cammeraygal people, they're sometimes thought to be cottages or doctors, surgeons, medicine men. You know, they had a lot of knowledge, and they moved around the Sydney coastal region, removing the tooth from the men as part of, well, the boys when they were young and the men when they were old. And this was part of their spiritual ceremony. The teeth were said to hold power. And Doringa Colby's wife, look at all those leaves flying. It's quite something. Colby's wife, Doringa, actually, I wondered what was going to happen today. It's getting exciting, isn't it? It's supposed to drop to 8 degrees, so get ready. You need your jumper handy. So she gave them and she said, don't tell the Cammeraygal. And Bennelong asked Governor Phillip to kill all the Cammeraygal. My ancestors, or the men, two of the men I know in the clan, were also Corrigees. And Bennelong and various people said there's bad people out there. So again, thinking negatively about these special men. I don't know if you saw that Clever Man on TV. Did anyone see that, AB? Quite, just letting you know of how, because famously, Aboriginal people escaped from jail where they shouldn't have escaped from. They got out of chains and everything, and everyone thought they had some special magic power to do this. Of course, they probably only had slim wrists and slim ankles, I reckon. Just slip right out. I don't know. There is also the story of Pemulwuy, who flew away as a crow to get out of jail. Now, this was the story that passed down. So obviously, there are stories about people shape-shifting and doing all sorts of things. So we have no knowledge in the Sydney. We look at Sydney as a place that had really this North Shore had first impact, really, apart from Botany Bay, where you had them leaving for their overland expeditions up the coast, leaving to head further north in their boats. They'd always come to the North Shore of Sydney, to the Manly area, and they also kidnapped all the people from here to act as translators. So they first of all kidnapped young Arabanu, who ended up dying of smallpox. You think what the people here faced. There was this period where they met the people, they met Doringa, they met Colby, Bennelong, they met Buladari and all these young people, young warriors. And then all the diseases came in. The first fleet brought 30 diseases into Australia. 30, you heard of the Ruby Princess bringing one. Imagine if 30 diseases hit. You had German measles, rubella, all the sexual diseases from a maritime crew for hire. And you had women perishing on the streets, being raped and having these sexual diseases. At the end of the military wars, which Pemulwuy was at the fore, you've got to remember people then got locked up for over 100 years. Controlled by the Aboriginal Protection Board. They could not care for these sites. What happened to our language here? Where did it go? This was taken. You were severely punished for being an Aboriginal person, speaking language or doing dance. So I always get asked these questions, do you know how they did this or that? No, I don't. We'll never know. So it's going to pour down. Can you feel it? It's coming. It's coming.
Hello everyone, nice to meet you and welcome to the Coal Loader. First time here for this chunk of land was given to a chap called Edward Wollstonecraft. North Sydney, what we know as North Sydney, was divided up into some very large giveaway estates, if you like, and it's only the middle bit of North Sydney that was retained as Crown land that was then sold off as building blocks. And if you look at a street pattern of North Sydney today, you can tell exactly where that was because the streets up the centre are in a grid, and that was the Crown land that was sold off from the 1820s, 30s, actually 1830s, 40s and onwards. But on either side, so this big area that we're standing on, Wollstonecraft, Waverton, up to Crow's Nest, and to the east at Neutral Bay and Cremorne, the streets are really higgledy-piggledy. They follow the topography, and that's because they were big land grants that were only subdivided at various times through the 19th century. So that's quite interesting. So Edward Wollstonecraft, 1819, 1820, got 524 acres of land, which is 200 and something hectares. I can never quite remember what the conversion is. All of this land that was regarded as pretty crappy land, actually, because he had a partner called Alexander Berry, who they were partners merchants. Berry decided he'd get very arable land down at Shoalhaven on the shores of the banks of the Shoalhaven River. Really lush, wonderful cropping land. They bought the produce there up to Berry's Bay. There was a warehouse there and they on-sold it into the town of Sydney. And there's a quote from Berry saying, why did you get that land on the North Shore? You know, why would you want that land? Because it's sandy and nothing grows here. Things do grow a bit further up north on the ridge. There's some clay up there, and Wollstonecraft, I came across a really nice reference to Wollstonecraft developing his own variety of nectarine up there on the farm that he called Crow's Nest Farm. It's called Crow's Nest because it's so high up, and the Crow's Nest is the little bucket on top of a mast for a sailing ship. So yeah, that's where the term comes from. Not because there's lots of crows around. So he chose to live way up high and away from the water, possibly because he was a bit of a misanthrope. My understanding of his personality, he wasn't a particularly friendly man. He was a magistrate, so it must have been terrible coming before him in a court, because he didn't seem to like anyone. But he chose to live way up there, as far away from the town as possible, despite having all this foreshore. So his little cottage, quite comfortable, was called Crow's Nest, and the suburb is named after him. The suburb of Wollstonecraft is named after him. He dies in 1832, and that land passes on via his sister to Alexander Berry, his partner. And this becomes a huge estate that is only carved up incrementally by the late 19th century. So it stays as one great big piece, basically in one family's hands, which again explains the development pattern of the land. It also explains how it is that this remarkable headland and Berry Island, normally I'd be doing this talk on the platform and I'd be pointing to Berry Island, and you can see what I mean. Perhaps when we go out there, I'll point to Berry Island anyway. Berry Island over there and Ball's Head became parkland. But the difference between the two is quite striking. Have you been to Ball's Head? Have you driven around it, perhaps in your bus? No. Pooh. Well, what we can do actually is, if we have time, is walk down the tunnel and actually just look at Ball's Head. Can we do that? Look at the bush, or yeah, okay. We can do a loop back. I'll flag this with you now and keep it in mind. Ball's Head, when you look at it, is all Angophora forest, and what else is there, Andrew? Yeah, but a whole lot of other stuff. There's some residual Norfolk Island pine. Everything that you can see there has grown since 1932. Before that, it was a barren headland. So between, say, 1920 and 1932, everything was cut down off there for firewood, possibly some timber for formwork. I'm going to talk about formwork in a moment. But it was a lush forest in the late 19th century. We have the photographs to prove it. Probably dominant Angophora forest then. And then in a decade, 1920, when this place is being built, it's often the case that when there's a development site, an industrial site, neighbouring sites get degraded for a whole lot of reasons. Pilfering and all sorts of things went on. So that was totally denuded. So everything there that you will see hopefully later on is new growth. Look over at Berry Island, which hopefully you'll be able to do too, and that's an Angophora forest, and that has never been cleared. So that's possibly the oldest, along with Bradley's Head and perhaps Middle Head. They were never properly cleared because they were resumed for defence purposes in the 1860s. So we're not cleared for forest or development or any farming rather. Berry Island is really old, so that's cool. So these two places became public parks because the descendants of Alexander Berry did a land swap in the early 20th century, 1906. They said to the state government, we will give you that really prime foreshore harbour land, and foreshore harbour land was prime at the time because Sydney Harbour was one of the busiest harbours in the empire, if you can believe it, but it really was. If you build a hospital down at the town of Berry, named after Alexander Berry because his family was so important down there. So the David Berry Hospital, which still stands today as this sort of strange early 20th century hospital, really beautiful building, was built for £100,000, and it was a straight swap. And the public, the Crown, got back Ball's Head and Berry Island. And then in the 1920s, those two chunks of land, this one bald and that one forested, were given to the people of New South Wales as public reserves, as parks, by Jack Lang, the Labor Premier. After some lobbying by local residents, and council got on side and he said, sure, public parks are a good thing, yeah, we'll hand it over. So before then, however, and here's the interesting conservation, well, that's actually quite an interesting the conservation story too, I'll get further into it. The lease for this site, which was now Crown land from 1906, was given over to the Union Steamship Company, which is a New Zealand firm, for bunkering coal in 1916. So very deep waterfront here, good for big ships. So the government owned the land. They said, sure, we need to develop Sydney Harbour. We're going to develop this a bit like Darling Harbour on the south side. It'll be really great. Lots of ships here, lots of wharfage and all the rest of it. Henry Lawson, who I'm sure you've heard of, maybe you associate mainly with back blocks and drovers' wives and stories like that, loaded dog. Henry Lawson actually spent a lot of time in North Sydney and wrote some of the most wonderful, intimate stories and poems about this harbourside community, working class, boat builders, all sorts of people that I've ever come across. He had already written a beautiful poem about this park, this forest. It hadn't been cut down at that point. And he furiously wrote off another one around 1916 called The Sacrifice of Ball's Head, which is a remarkable poem because it's the first instance that I have ever come across of someone saying that land should be kept because it's the only piece of bush and cliff that the harbour people know. How about that? So he's defending his working class harbour community in this intense these little suburbs of small houses because this was their patch of bushland. Now you normally think of protests like that with the Resident Action Group of the 1960s and 70s and the Builders Labourers Federation and Kelly's Bush over there. Well, here is Henry Lawson saying, and what are you doing? You're signing it away and it'll all go because you're going to build a coal loader. Did you want to add something? No, sorry, it looked like you looked expectant. Yeah. So that is a protest poem, and we can give you copies if you're interested. It is just astonishing. I think it was published in the Bulletin. Really passionate and really pessimistic. Good thing is they built the coal loader, and the coal loader survived this remarkable piece of industrial foreshore. They did denude the bushland, but it all became public parkland after that. So Henry Lawson died in 1922, 4 years before that was signed over by Jack Lang. So it's kind of a good news story, and Berries Bay there. Now, sorry, do you want to add anything?
Were you going to talk about the efforts to revegetate the area?
I was just about to get onto that. Yeah, good. So, barren piece of foreshore. This place is up and going by 1920, breaking records for coal loading. I'll describe how that process works if we have time, if you want me to, but there may not be time. Before that, coal loading in Sydney Harbour, so steamers burnt coal, as you probably know, to steam around the world. They're bringing manufactured goods to Sydney and taking grain and wool back to Europe and all this type of thing. They're still burning coal. It was done by hand, guys on planks with shovels and bags and baskets of coal. Unbelievable, really dangerous, really crappy work. This is an automated system. It was state of the art when it was installed between 1918 and 1920. And from the get-go, it's breaking coal loading records. So you get heaps of coal onto a ship and off it goes, and the next one comes in and off it goes. It's really an amazing system. And again, I'll describe how it works. So that barren piece of rock becomes a park in 1926. And local people, and also some others, some incipient conservationists, Walter Froggatt is a name that may mean something to some of you. He was one of them. David Stead, who's very important in the early history of conservation in New South Wales, was another. And possibly, although I haven't really nailed this one, but many people say it's true, I just haven't seen the documents. Annie Wyatt, who was the founder of the National Trust, one of the founders of the National Trust in 1947, before she got into built heritage, was really into natural heritage, and she was advocating that this headland should be replanted. And that's what they did. And there was a whole set of planting days out, if you like. They got the seed stock, I think, from the Botanic Gardens, and they got there and they planted it all. Well, what did they choose? They chose the iconic species for every reserve in Sydney, which is Norfolk Island pine, which comes from Norfolk Island, because they grow really straight, and they tell everyone from a long way away, there's a bit of parkland right over there. So Manly's got it, Kiama became a coastal resort area, and they've got them. Wherever you see a Norfolk Island pine, think it was either a very rich man's garden or it was a public reserve. Same with Phoenix palms. They were another sort of Edwardian planting through the 20s. So there are some Norfolk Island pines down on the headland. They still survive. Now they must be, I don't know what the average age of a Norfolk Island pine is, probably a couple of hundred years. Some of these are looking like they might be beginning to senesce, am I right? Or I'm pretty sure they won't be replanted. So their evidence, this is what I find so intriguing, their evidence of a cultural landscape, a cultural planted landscape. Yes, this is a parkland, we need Norfolk Island pines. But also at this time, you've got David Stead, Walter Froggatt, Annie Wyatt, the legacy of Joseph Henry Maiden, who'd only died in 1925. He'd been the director of the Botanic Gardens. There is a growing love of native plants in Australia. Wattle Day had started in 1909, so it's up and going. Every 1st of September is Wattle Day. We love wattles. What do they plant? Acacia alata. It's not a local species of wattle, but it's wattle. It's Australian, it's great, and that's what we'll do. So we'll get those, and they got those, I think, from the Botanic Gardens. So they keep popping up, and Tristram, who's one of Andrew's colleagues in bush care, is pulling the bloody things out because they don't belong here. So you and your team are trying to turn this into endemic bushland, what was here back in the day, before whiteys turned up, and there's all this sort of residual other stuff, some of it native but not endemic to the area, popping up nonetheless. As I understand it, the Angophora is dormant seed stock. So so how about that? When you go there and you see these, wow, magnificent orange trunks, that was in the soil after they clear-felled it in the 1920s, and it's back. And I think that's just amazing and beautiful. So it's a really interesting mix of natural and cultural landscape. Sorry.
Can I tie that in? So this morning, when we were at Mossman, and we were talking about the Bradleys, and we were talking about working from good bush to bad bush, talking about working from resilient areas to low resilient areas to where there's seed in the soil. So that's the important story about Bull's Head, right? Is that when you have chocolate too, but the important didn't damage the soil. So the soil still has little known earth in it, ready to regenerate in high resilient area. So there wasn't all this urbanisation. So in a lot of areas like around Sydney, on the escarpments, kind of having negative environmental effects down slope, there was none of that kind of permanent housing built on top to destroy or reduce the resilience of the area. So that's why it looks like a natural area today. Because it wasn't urbanised, basically, yeah.
Little bit of interference, but just right in the middle, and you wouldn't know it when you're walking around it, but I looked at, there's a set of maps, a set of aerial photographs of Sydney taken during the war, 1942, in a site called Six Maps. Has anyone come across that? Yeah, go look at those. They're not obvious, but you can find them somewhere. So for obvious reasons, defence reasons, someone took a plane and photographed Sydney. And when you look at Berry Island, there's a little bald patch in the middle, and it was cut down. This is just a tiny little area for a searchlight. But that's all. And when you go there, you can still go there today, and it's really underbrushy. The Angophoras haven't grown back there. Maybe they were never there. But you wouldn't know it anyway. If you walk around, you will see these amazing Angophoras. There is, I don't know how old they are. And when you look west, you can look west to Gore Cove, the Shell oil terminal, and you see the residual muscular industrial harbour through ancient Angophoras. It's just a wonderful juxtaposition. And in front of you will be an engraving of some type of marine creature too. So this one and that one are two of the major engravings. Sydney is no longer an industrial harbour. It's hardly a working harbour at all. It's all about luxury. So the leases on this site and BP, just in the adjoining bay, were not renewed in 1992. And in 1997, Bob Carr, following on from Jack Lang, said, okay, let's give this land back to the people as parkland. Now, instead of tearing all this down, you don't want to do that, it became a public facility with this amazing industrial infrastructure. The reason it survives is because it's made from sandstone, and it's one of the last uses of sandstone, post-colonial, because it's built in the 1910s, I mean through, say, 1916 through to 1920, yet it's made from sandstone. So normally I walk the tunnel and I'll show you how it's made from sandstone. There were sandstone blocks facing the tunnels, really beautiful. But you will see here, this is concrete, and over there is a mix of amalgam, which is the crunched up stone and sandstone, amalgam and concrete when they mashed up the site because there wasn't enough stone to build tunnels all the way through an existing bank of stone. They just put all that together and turned it into this really beautiful slurry, and they shaped it with these great wide planks of iron, of hardwood. Look at that. So in here you can see the grain of the timber. So if you can imagine one plank after another, and they're pouring the timber down, and then when it's set you pull it off and you've got all that. So there is a forest, or part of a forest, shaping the stone. And what's so beautiful, when this was turned into a public facility, when was it, 2016 or thereabouts? We redeveloped this area and it's really special. Cut some of these back and you can see this beautiful, that's not natural stone, but that's a mix of crushed up sandstone and river stone from somewhere else, and maybe a bit of concrete aggregate, but I just love that. It's a mix of material, so cool. And that's just all they either ran out of time or ran out of money, but all those big chunks over there, they just piled it up on the side to make the seawall, and used concrete on the outside, but obviously didn't make it too aesthetic there, but it looks really cool now.